Men from all over the world sail the treacherous trade routes of the Indian Ocean.
In a fairly short span of time starting several days ago, we've gotten a few different bits of news regarding Ubisoft and their upcoming games. In one case, there's some news about an already released game, but we'll get to that in a bit. One particularly baffling and foreboding piece of information is the current state of their long-anticipated and long-in-development multiplayer pirate game, Skull and Bones. It came to light that the game's development was even worse off than any of us could have imagined, and I'm sure most of us were already imagining some pretty bad stuff considering unfortunate news in the past. In a particularly lengthy article on Kotaku, interviews with over 20 current and former Ubisoft employees revealed that the game suffered from a lack of vision due to too many individuals fighting for power over the project. And the game's development was rebooted or refreshed pretty much on a yearly basis. Even to this day, core elements of the game's systems and functions haven't been finalized, and this title was announced over 4 years ago. As of right now, the game has just barely passed the alpha phase, and the budget has ballooned to $120 million, with little to show for it. And even worse, the game can't be cancelled and is legally obligated to be completed and released due to a deal with the Singaporean government. Meaning, despite all of this trouble that would get other games canned, it will need to come out eventually. It has to. It's just a matter of time. What condition the game will be in when that happens, however, is completely up in the air, and it's not looking great. If you want to read more about it, I'll leave a link to the article in the description. Outside of that, there's also the reveal of Tom Clancy's XDefiant, a free-to-play shooter that looks as though Ubisoft didn't know if they wanted to make their own Call of Duty or their own Fortnite, so they opted to combine the gameplay of the former with the tone of the latter, and it just looks awful. Having Tom Clancy's name attached to this just reeks of a bad attempt at brand recognition. There's no reason for his name to be there. It looks like a game that was automatically generated by some sort of game development AI by scanning the sales charts for what's popular right now. It's a game that looks like it came right off of a production line, made by investors as opposed to one specific person with a unique vision leading a group of people. Despite obvious attempts to pretend otherwise in the trailer, the game has no personality of its own. It's a weird Frankenstein's monster. An imitation of other things that are actually alive. Even more annoying, to me at least, is how they call it an arena shooter, but it sure as shit doesn't look like Quake 3 to me. Could it defy the odds and end up being pretty good? Sure, I think that's still within the realm of possibility. But, based off of first impressions, this is probably the most tone-deaf kind of game Ubisoft could make right now. And that's probably been the most frustrating thing about many of Ubisoft's games for many years. A lot of them seem to have some sort of disconnect with the demographic they're always trying to aim for. What makes Skull and Bones and XDefiant so bothersome to me is that their poor condition or reception could have been prevented if Ubisoft just had a better idea of what people wanted and didn't actively seek to make the next big thing. The Kotaku article about Skull and Bones does state that the game started out with modest ambitions and was aiming to be a simple copy and expansion of Assassin's Creed 4's sailing and ship battling mechanics. Basically a reskin. That's fine. That's exactly what people wanted the game to be. It's what I wanted it to be when it was first announced. I didn't expect or want it to be anything more complicated than that. Just take what already existed in Black Flag, add more customization and a few more mechanics to give it the depth a standalone game should have, and you're golden. The problems within development, however, began to arise when the Ubisoft Singapore team realized that the game would probably look and feel outdated by the time it finally released. So they decided to raise their ambitions. Thus, Skull and Bones was forcefully transformed into the first title for a potentially big, new IP to stand among Ubisoft's other big moneymakers. And this is where it gets frustrating. The desire to turn everything they make into another huge franchise is something that keeps holding this company back. They have interesting ideas, but the attempt at making everything into a big blockbuster with mass appeal eventually turns their games into overly homogeneous experiences that resemble each other too much or lack their own personality anyway. And then there's Splinter Cell, the series they just don't seem to want to touch anymore despite adding Sam Fisher into as many Tom Clancy games as they can. It's part of what made XDefiant's reveal so irritating. Why was this made instead of the thing people have been actively asking for years now? The most obvious answer is sales. Blacklist didn't meet expectations, selling only 2 million copies in the time frame that Ubisoft hoped it would sell 5. So if Splinter Cell does come back, it'll likely include a way to continue monetizing the game after release, which is difficult because it's not like other Tom Clancy games that easily allow for that to happen. Maybe they could do something with Spies vs. Mercs. But after that, there's the question of whether or not people within Ubisoft actually want to work on a new game. In 2019, Yves Guillemot gave a pretty straightforward answer to the question of where Splinter Cell is. Apparently, teams at Ubisoft are scared of working on the series because of fans telling them to not change things. Well, I have some news for Ubisoft, because fans wouldn't be making demands like that if you hadn't developed the reputation of making dumb changes or additions no one asked for in the first place. In the years following the release of Blacklist, it's been clear that Ubisoft wants to turn every franchise they have into something they can milk on the long term. And obviously fans of a single-player stealth game wouldn't want that to happen to their favorite series. A Splinter Cell game wasn't even in full-time development at the moment Yves' comments were made, but they were already worrying about backlash to things they haven't even done yet, which is a bit telling. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Simply look back at the most positively received games in the eyes of fans, in this case probably Chaos Theory and Blacklist, and just focus on what made those games great. Level design, combat, replayability, challenge, visuals and audio, a stealth experience that has no weird, annoying quirks, and rewards players for efficiency and ingenuity while also giving them good reasons to do missions again with different strategies. But, as we've come to expect from the company in recent years, Ubisoft will probably make this more complicated than it needs to be. Now, my final issue with Ubisoft, at least in this video, is their odd habit of just releasing games into the wild and letting most of the public consciousness forget about them soon after. There was another recent piece of news about their mobile game, Elite Squad, which will be closing in October. This is big information to me, not because I played the game, because I didn't, but because the game came out last year and I had absolutely no idea. And while reading this news, I thought back at how I saw this game announced at an event and heard literally nothing about it from anyone since then. And then I realized this isn't the only game that Ubisoft did this to. Their Battle Royale, Hyperscape, has also been out for just shy of a whole year, and again, I had no idea. I don't play Battle Royales admittedly, but I know of basically every decently popular one under the sun, simply because they pop up in front of me on a regular basis thanks to people talking about them, but Hyperscape never does. I also keep forgetting the crew games exist, which are basically just watered down Forza Horizons, but there's been 2 of them already, and the second one just got more DLC this year. Now granted, some of these games are more successful than others, but it's just weird to me how I never see them pop up either in casual discussion or marketing material. They just seem to release and then disappear from public discourse over the next several weeks. Looking back on all of this, I realized that Ubisoft just seems to simply throw their AA games out into the wild after a few hype trailers at events and just hope they survive. They come up with an idea, try to make it as appealing as possible to as many people as possible in a very transparent manner, throw it at a wall and see if it sticks. It doesn't feel like they're making games because they want to make an experience with its own identity anymore. It feels like they're just constantly trying to create a massive moneymaker using some sink or swim strategy. And I know Ubisoft isn't the only one guilty of this. They're just making it more painfully obvious than others. Everything has to have franchise potential, everything has to have a way to allow for post-launch monetization, everything has to look pretty and new to attract as many people as possible. It feels like they're afraid of releasing a game that might be perceived as cheap, even though that's exactly how some of their games look when they seem slapped together by investor ideas and lack their own personality because of it. It's so hard to get hype for a new game made by Ubisoft because in spite of any interesting ideas they may have for it, they all just seek to look and feel the same as another game that's already a success, and the end result is some watered-down version of something better. This homogenization is a big reason why huge publishers often seem so stifling to creativity. I do still play Ubisoft games on occasion, usually the odd Assassin's Creed or Far Cry, but even the games I do end up liking, I don't feel super strongly about. I play them for 20, 30, maybe even 40 to 50 hours, and I don't dislike it, but the experience never sticks with me for long, and it hasn't since probably Assassin's Creed 2. They're just a weird company that somehow manages to find the safest ways of implementing interesting ideas, which completely ruins the point. Many of the games they offer are indistinguishable sludge, and they all feel like one another, the epitome of a mass-produced experience. Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Watch Dogs all share the same basic open-world action-adventure foundation, and a difference in setting and combat doesn't really do enough to distract from that similarity, even if they end up being good games individually. But it seems like that's what a lot of people want because they keep selling. Maybe that's because of the feeling of familiarity, or maybe because fans won't know that they want a new risky approach until they get it. I don't know. But that's basically all I wanted to say on the matter of Ubisoft and their odd habits of uniformity and franchise hunting. I could probably go on, but I don't want this to become too indulgent. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.